Hello and welcome to our second installation of TEDx University of Johannesburg 2020. This is a place where we create a unique gathering of brilliant minds and ideas worth spreading. What a treat to be with you and our lineup this evening. Our theme, Dynamically Shaping the Future. And what does this mean? Leading consultatively, engaging meaningfully, facing the challenges that we have with courage and earning trust. But you won't hear it better than from our first speaker this evening, Maria from ARP. Prof from ARP is an academic, a storyteller, a distinguished teacher and mentor. She is the mama bear. Over to you, Prof.
Do you feel as though the rug has been pulled out from under your feet? Has COVID so disrupted your world that you feel as though physically, emotionally, financially, your world has been turned upside down? Many of you listening to this would have felt that I've just got everything back on track after the 2008 crash, and now we have COVID. How do we reimagine a future? How do we reimagine a future when it feels as though everything we've known has just been pulled away from under us? I'm going to share my story with you today, and it's a story about reimagining. It's a story about having the rug pulled out from under my feet several times. And I hope that in this story, you are able to find some inspiration and perhaps an idea or two to help you take the next step in your own future. When I was 16 years old, in 1989, I woke up one Friday morning feeling terrible. I felt like I had flu. I went to school, I stayed in bed all weekend. By Monday morning, I wasn't feeling any better. What was wrong with me? We went to the doctor, and the doctor thought it was flu. But a month down the road, I still had the same symptoms. My body ached. I was running a fever. My head hurt all the time, and I was nauseous. And it just kept going on and on. We went to so many different doctors. They thought I had yuppie flu, and then another doctor suggested that I had an over-anxious mother, and then somebody else suggested that I myself was suffering from depression, and that was the problem. I got over the depression that I was struggling with, but the symptoms persisted. After 3 years of being flat on my back in bed, I landed up in hospital and my organs were beginning to fail. Most importantly, my heart was starting to beat irregularly, and the doctors thought I had about 6 months left to live. My parents were going to have none of it. They thought there was definitely something wrong with me and we needed to find a cure. And my father got in touch with a doctor who was treating my old riding school teacher. And this doctor believed that people like myself had a form of tick-bite fever, what we now know to be Lyme's disease, but in those days nobody quite knew what it was. My bloods had to be sent to Belgium. We were living in South Africa. And so this was a big expense. And when the bloods went to Belgium, they came back showing that I did have this form of tick-bite fever. Living in South Africa, we knew about tick-bite fever, but we only tested for certain types of it. And so I had gone undiagnosed for so many years. I then went on a course of treatment for 18 months of high doses of antibiotics. I would be on an antibiotic for a week, off for 2 weeks, and then back on the antibiotic. Finally, I was able to walk again, and I finished my schooling, and I felt that now life could start. I went to university, and throughout my undergraduate degree and postgraduate degrees, I would have periods of being well, and then I would be sick for a year or 3 months or 6 months, but I made it through. And I got my master's degree, and I got accepted to do a PhD in the UK with a British Commonwealth scholarship, and the world was looking fantastic. I went off and I started my studies. I came back to South Africa to do my fieldwork, and once again I felt ill. This time the symptoms were a little bit different. I wasn't running a fever, but I had the most terrible aches, not just in my muscles, but also in my joints. 18 months later, I landed up with a doctor who diagnosed me as having a form of autoimmune disease and fibromyalgia. She put me onto the right medication, and I was good to go again. I picked myself up again, and I went back to the UK, and I worked on my PhD. I came back to South Africa in 2006, and I had completed my PhD, and I really felt life was going to start. I had learned amazing things during the time that I had been ill. When I was so young, and I was sick for 4 years, I could read, I could listen to the radio, and I could do cross-stitch, but I couldn't do much more than that. In this time, I really learnt the importance of listening. I also learnt the importance of silence, and I learnt the importance of broadening one's horizons, exploring the world through books. This was an amazing time for me and for my friends. During this time, my friends realized that I was always at home. And so people would come and visit me. And almost every day, somebody came to see me. And they didn't come to see me because they were sorry for me, but rather because I was always there and available. And I realized that one of the most important things in life, friendships, are something we don't get awards for. We don't get a PhD in friendship. And yet, it's one of the most important things in the world. My friends often tell me that they miss that time in my life because I was always available. I was always there for them. As I was going through my degrees and struggling with being well and then being ill and then being well again, I learned how to have a certain determination. But what I really learned was the importance of doing what you love. If you do something that you love doing, then you have that inner energy to keep going. I was studying world religions and found it completely fascinating. One of the things that I learned in my studies and in all my reading was that the great epics of this world, the great literature, even the very oldest story, the story of Gilgamesh, a story written in Mesopotamia about 4,500 years ago, is a story about somebody overcoming. This hero goes on an extraordinary quest and he vanquishes all this evil and he overcomes, and then his life is wonderful. Much of our self-help literature is very helpful, but it tells us that if we do certain things, then our life will be much easier. My struggle was that I would do all these things, and still I often got ill. Still, things were disappointing. But when I got back to South Africa, having completed my PhD, I got married, I became an Anglican priest, I published my first book, I had a wonderful job teaching as a lecturer, and I was really enjoying my life. Then, in 2012, I miscarried at 13 weeks. For me, this was really a difficult experience. I was so looking forward to this little baby, and I was convinced it was a little girl. I miscarried because once again, I was ill. I had to stop working. I went on to chemotherapy and then biologic drugs because the autoimmune disease that I had now flared up and become full-blown. During this time, I really experienced loss in a profound way. It felt as though the rug was pulled out from under me yet again. I lost my job, I lost the baby that I wanted, but I also had a sense of loss about the future. Did my future look like a series of getting back onto my feet and then losing it all again? Getting back onto my feet and losing it all again. And really, why did I want to get up in the morning? What was the point of all of this? In my loss, I started to think about, why am I here? What is my purpose? My purpose is not to win some great award. My purpose is not to be the best at something. Surely my purpose must be something deeper than that. And I started to think about the world and how we judge things. What we love to do is take a ruler. We take one measure and we use it to measure everything. So if we took this ruler and we used it to measure the beautiful candles all around me, we would know how high the candles are, we would know how wide the candles are, we would know the height of the flame, but we really wouldn't know very much more. And we do that with our lives. We measure ourselves according to a bank account. In the academic world, we do it according to the amount of publications that you have made. In the business world, we often do it according to the amount of sales you've made. What we love to do is take one measure and say, that's who you are. And that's so unfair and untrue. The second fallacy that we tell ourselves is what we love to tell young children when they start school, that everybody is starting at the same point, and that we measure ourselves equally according to some kind of criteria. That's not true. My achievements are very different to your achievements. Not because the achievements are different, but because I've had to achieve these things from a different perspective to you, from a different beginning point or vantage point. I have achieved the things I've done while dealing with a chronic illness. You have achieved the things you've achieved while dealing with your struggles, with your challenges. And we seem to pretend that this doesn't exist. And so we undermine our achievements so often. Having got over this last illness, I then went on and got a job at the University of Johannesburg. I became head of department and then vice dean, and I'm currently the executive director of the libraries, a job I love. But it comes back to my question, what is my purpose? Why do I get up in the morning? My purpose is to make other people flourish. My purpose is to create an environment where it doesn't matter what your challenges are. It doesn't matter what your limitations are. It is an environment in which you can use what you do have and allow yourself to flourish in that space. For me, leadership is all about creating a team that we can work together, that we can flourish together. My illness has taught me the importance of a team because I don't know what tomorrow is going to look like. All I can do is live in my moment today. Lao Tzu, one of the famous sages of China, says that when we live in the past, we live with depression. When we live in the future, we live with anxiety. When we live in the present, we live with peace. And that's been one of the big lessons that I've had to learn. And so as you go through COVID-19 and your world is falling apart and you have to reimagine and reshape a new future for yourself, try to think of what is it that is your purpose, not against the ruler of a bank account or achievements or sales, but against your authentic self. Look at what you have been able to achieve, given the constraints of your own life. And then allow yourself to live in the present. It's the only place where we can find peace. And for me, the other really important thing is allow yourself to live in the present with friends and family, in connection with one another. I have the privilege of living in South Africa, And our African philosophy is, I am because you are. And perhaps that's one of the most important things I've learned in my journey. It's not about achievements. It's about my relating to other people, my sharing with other people, my ability to create a space for others to flourish so that I can flourish with you. Together, we will get through COVID. We will find new ways of being. And I hope that this story inspires you, that the new future that you reimagine for yourself is one in which you are authentic. COVID is offering us new beginnings. Let's embrace them. Let's see where they'll take us. And let's live in the present, at peace.
Next on our TEDx virtual stage is Kirushan Gupta. He is a frank and authentic speaker, a trained statistician, a self-taught coder in his teens, and an entrepreneur. And he knows all about seeing opportunities that have been overlooked and leading us dynamically into the future. Kirushan Gupta.
Hi there. My name is Kirushan Gupta, and I'm really excited about telling you my story today as part of this TEDx event. When I was growing up, I worked for my grand's store. I was about 10 years old. She gave me a lot of responsibility, which I absolutely loved. I often questioned why other adults weren't giving me as much responsibility. And while I was getting to my work, to all of the various jobs she gave me at the store, the one thing I realized about myself was that I absolutely loved business. But here's the conundrum. As much as I loved business, I felt more obsessed with creating experiences with the customer than I had any interest when it came to money. So I faced an interesting conundrum where there was such a strong urge and thrust towards business, but there wasn't a commensurate urge towards money or making money. Now, typically, when we think about business, we think that business people are very driven towards money. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think that making money is wrong, certainly not. And I don't find that money is bad in any way. I, however, for myself, have always noticed that on my ranking of importances, money is not my top of mind importance. I've always been driven by something that is far deeper than just getting money. And it's usually something to do with serving the customer, making the customer really happy. And the thing that really gets me excited is creating an experience that makes the customer feel very special. I remember when I was young and I was working there during the school holidays at the store, we created something called a parcel counter. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's basically a place for shoppers to leave their bags while they go off and shop so that they can be comfortable while they shop. And then they can come back and give you a little ticket and they collect their bags and they're on their way. And it was just a wonderful experience being able to create something that people really enjoyed. In fact, these customers, they enjoyed it so much, I would often have these long lines waiting at my parcel counter to hand over their bags so that they could go off and shop. And you have to keep in mind that I converted this dirty, dusty room into this usable and desired thing called a parcel counter. So for me, that was the essence of why I was doing what I was doing. It wasn't for money. But then this nagging question about the quest for money didn't stop at that point. In fact, it had only but begun. For the last 10 years, I've had the opportunity to travel quite a lot. And during my travels, I've often taken time out to go speak with different groups of people. It would usually be in the format of events and seminars, and I would go and engage with people, different audiences all across the world. And during these engagements, I would use every opportunity I could to ask two simple questions. The first question I would ask is, what circumstances would you say requires some kind of money in order for you to be happy? And then on the converse, my second question would be, under what circumstances would you say that your happiness is entirely independent of money? So those were my two questions. The first one to do with happiness depending on money, and the second one, happiness independent of money. What was interesting is that I tended to get similar answers no matter where I did this seminar anywhere in the world. The answers were very similar. And on the side of dependent on money, we would usually hear things like, I need money for education. Education costs money. I need money for healthcare. Someone in my family is not well, and I do in fact need to take care of them. And if I didn't have money, I would be incredibly unhappy. And then there would be things along the lines of, I'd like to have the freedom of being able to go and have a coffee with a friend whenever I want. I don't want to feel beholden to the fact that I have to wait until a particular time in the month, or I have to say no to a coffee because my bank balance says so. I don't want to be beholden to a bank balance. There was also the factor of luxuries. We all like a little bit of luxuries every now and then, and people would often tell me that they'd like to take a trip abroad, or they'd like to buy a fancy bottle of perfume, or that Ferrari. These are the luxuries that just make life so much more enjoyable. There were also other little creative bits and pieces to do with wanting to help others more and not necessarily being able to, because one's bank balance didn't necessarily always allow one to help others more. So that was the essence of the stuff on the dependent side. On the independent side, it's very interesting. After people got rid of all of this angst and all of this frustration to do with money being connected to happiness, and once we all made peace with the fact that there is, in fact, a valid relationship between money and happiness, once that was out the way, the rest of the conversation seemed to flow so much more easily. And on the independent side, we'd hear things like, even though I can afford a big education, sometimes, I feel that I'm so much smarter than those people around me, even the people who have lots of money. So in those situations, money is certainly independent of happiness, because one's IQ is very native. It's very unique to the individual. And then there was the factor of healthcare. Sure, healthcare is necessary, but health is as necessary, if not more necessary. It's one's ability to take care of oneself and be healthy and live the healthiest life possible. And then there's the factor of friendship and wanting love around one and being able to create love around one. That doesn't necessarily require money. In fact, when you are hugging someone that you love, and when you're super close to someone and they embrace you, at that moment, you're not really thinking about your bank balance, we hope. And then there's the question of helping. To help another, you don't necessarily have to have a lot of money. People would realize time after time that to help that person cross the street, or to do a little bit of extra, go that extra mile for someone else for no apparent reason, doesn't necessarily cost anything. And in fact, in that moment, when you are helping that person cross the street, the thing that you're feeling is just a desire or an impulse, a native impulse to help. You're not thinking necessarily about anything to do with your own cash or finances at that point. So there are all these wonderful things that are independent of money, and it seems to hover around this concept of creation. Stuff that people want to create seems to be independent of money. If an artist gets up one day and if he wants to create a masterpiece, and if he experiences this massive dose of inspiration, he can go and he can find a canvas, he can find some kind of format, and he can use his ingenuity and creation ability, his inspiration. He can use that, he can employ that to create a masterpiece or write a story or tell a tale. And all of this is very independent of what's sitting in one's bank account. In fact, J.K. Rowling mentioned that the whole concept of Harry Potter came to her at the time when she was incredibly poor. So as we investigate the side of the map that talks about independence of money, some startling things begin to emerge. The most obvious one for me being the fact that when you're looking at the parts of life where our happiness is independent of money, we find that that is the side of the page to do with giving. One is all about giving at that point. One isn't about receiving. Whereas when we look at the other side of the page, that side is all about receiving. So on the one hand, where we look at situations where our happiness is in fact dependent on money, we are receiving stuff from the environment. We're receiving education. We're receiving healthcare. We're receiving aid. Where we are experiencing situations where our happiness is independent of money, at that point we are giving. We are giving our care to others. We are giving our intelligence. It's coming from us into the outside world. We're giving our creativity. We are giving health to ourselves and to another through good choices. It's all emanating from within. So it's a flow of giving outward. So now, if we see that one is about giving and one is about receiving, is there necessarily a right and a wrong? And we all can admit that we live in a world that does seem to want to demonize an appreciation of money. And we do live in a world where there is this notion that if one admits to wanting to make money, there is some negative connotation associated with that. There is a bit of stigma on this thing called money. Well, I've just resolved through my decade of going through this exercise around the world that it isn't about what's right or what's wrong. It's all about sequence. When we look at the correct sequence, and when we truly unpack the flow line, we realize that, in fact, when we are trying to figure this thing out, all we have to do is ensure that we do the giving step first and the receiving step second. And if we can maintain that order of priority mentally, then we're doing okay. Then life is going to get a lot easier. Things are going to work out better. Let's unpack that a little bit more. So in order for us to make any money at all, in other words, to receive something in our direction, we have to be willing to give something first. So sequence counts. What does it mean to give something first? Let's say you're an artist and you get up in the morning and you have an inspiration and you want to create a painting. The correct sequence is you create that painting and you employ all of this wonderful energy that comes from you, that's natively yours, that's your superpower, your ability to create, your ability to imagine, your ability to use a technique, some color, anything that's inherently you. You employ all of these wonderful things that come from within you and you put it outward onto this canvas, and then you are left with this beautiful painting. So there you have a painting, which then goes into the market and gets exchanged for some kind of money or something in return. The correct sequence is for the individual or the artist to focus on the creation of his painting. And the place where the pressure must go is it must go on himself to create a beautiful painting that others will appreciate and enjoy. Now that is the correct sequence. However, that notion is often challenged in our life, and it is often challenged in our society. We are primarily, or we become primarily interested in the money flow. In other words, when we get up and instead of us running to the canvas, and instead of us focusing on our inspiration and creating something beautiful, before that happens, we tend to want to run and look at the bills, or look at the newspaper where we are flooded with a whole lot of advertisements, or we look at the internet, or we watch some TV and we're just getting all of these ads, whether it's on social media, on YouTube, we're getting all of these advertisements which tell us that we need money and money and money and money. And there's nothing wrong with being told that we need to make money, but it only starts to get wrong when we prioritize the making of money before we prioritize the creation of something useful that comes from our strengths. That is the only error we make. It's when we start putting this, which is our attention, on things that fundamentally are outside of our control. When we receive money, it's a flow of receiving from the environment. There's no way we can manufacture money. We are not, we're not a mint. We don't create money. We receive it from the environment in exchange for that which in fact emanates from us. So in truth, when we're feeling stress, when we're feeling a pressure to create money or to create a better life, when we're feeling all of those pressures, the correct place to go and focus our attention is on that gorgeous set of strengths that live within us, that beautiful thing that only we can bring to bear upon this planet, and to conjure some kind of goodness from within ourselves, take it into the market and exchange that for money. So the stress and focusing the stress that comes with focusing on money, that kind of stress doesn't empower us. It limits us because it's putting our attention on the one thing that we know we can't control because it emanates from the environment towards us. And the more we focus on that thing, the more we keep our attention on the thing that we can't in fact create, the weaker we become. And that's how you weaken a society. The clue that our society is getting weakened on this point is just look around you and just see how many people are just stressing over money. They're not stressing about the book they can write. They're not stressing about what they can do. They're not stressing about the thing that they can sell. They're not selling about the paint. They're not stressing about the painting that they can sell. They're stressing about money, and that's the biggest indicator that we are in a difficult place, and we need to snap out of this. We need to reorient. We need to accent on ability, not accent on money. And the same could be said for welfare. If we just have a lot of discussion about giving people money for free, then we're teaching society to focus on the receiving flow and not on the giving flow. You see, because this is the greatest trick. The greatest trick is that when you focus on the receiving flow, you become powerless. The environment, the thing that provides the money, that becomes God. So anything that is furnishing money that is outside of your creation, if you're just getting money for free, then that thing becomes a god to you, because at the end of the day, you cannot create something to exchange for money. Money becomes the powerful thing. Whereas if you focus on giving first, and the sequence is create first and then make the money happen on the back of that, then you make yourself powerful, because you are the source point of money. You are the source point of your livelihood, and you're the source point of what you eventually get. When we give people things too easily, don't get me wrong, help is good. And a lot of times we need help and we need to help others. So I'm not discounting the importance of help. However, I am saying that if we go ahead and if we start making people dependent on just unnecessary forms of dishing out cash, and we make people dependent on us, inadvertently we kind of giving that person the idea that, hey, we can create, we can make money, but not you. I believe in me, but I don't believe in you. But when you go to someone and you go, listen, I'm not going to give you that for free. I want to buy one of your products. I'd like to buy something that you've created. I'd like to buy something from your store. I'd like to buy something from your e-commerce. I'd like you to write me a poem and I'm going to pay you for that. That's what I'm going to give you money for. If we adopt this mindset of exchanging money for things that are of value, then we are creating around us a society where people become stronger and stronger and stronger. An obsessive society that focuses entirely on receiving money without putting any kind of accent on the giving first is a society that is set up fundamentally to weaken us. So why am I talking about this in light of a post-pandemic future? Well, very simply, we are facing one of the greatest gifts, and it's just serendipitous that it happened. We are facing one of the greatest gifts of our time, and that is that we can now showcase those gifts, those superpowers, those native abilities, things that come from our creative ability, things like the ability to write, to create a movie, to create music, to create anything, quite frankly. We are facing a time when taking those things as producers into the market where they are consumers has never been easier. We're facing a time right now where people can just access things on the internet. And what happened through the great part of the pandemic experience is that people were forced to use digital methods. Now, over time, digital has been erupting or disrupting this concept of intermediaries, meaning because of digital, we've seen a disruption in the area of broadcasting, where the broadcaster is the intermediary, or publishing. People can now just self-publish on the internet, or they could just create a movie and publish it on Vimeo or YouTube. There's this massive disintermediation that's happening right now across industries, where people can just show their creative works to everyone on the planet and they can monetize it. People are no longer beholden to an employer locally. They can go onto some kind of internet service and sell their copywriting skills or their writing abilities to anyone around the world. So because of this wonderful disintermediation, we now have the freedom to reach people anywhere around the world without being constrained to this idea of intermediaries. So these authorities that used to rule the roost, they no longer have as much power. And what's happened through the pandemic is that they've weakened even more. This erosion of the intermediaries, it has been happening for a very long time, but with COVID, it just made a mammoth dent. It actually just took them out of the knees. People are now far more comfortable with accessing content on the internet. So what this has done for all of us is it's invited us to look into ourselves. It's given us the freedom. It's taken the pressure away to look into ourselves, identify those superpowers that we bring to bear, that creative ability to manufacture something using our skills and our unique fingerprint. And we can now bring this to bear to many, many consumers around the world who are a lot more digital friendly in a post-pandemic environment throughout the world. And we can now just access all these audiences without having to go to these big authorities asking for help. So with that in mind, my request to you, or my invitation, is to really look at this. Focus on giving first. Go onto the internet, find a method, a medium, and give first. And once you're done with that, you will receive in abundance, and just take advantage of this digital vehicle that's been given to us in a post-pandemic future. Good luck and all the best. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Kirushan. Okay, I hope that you're all with us and enjoying. Drop your shoulders, breathing deeply. We're going to change it up a little bit. The next short video is by a multi-award winning dancer and choreographer. His name is Fana Shabalala, and this is a piece called Confined by Numbers. Again, you're going to hear the music of the UJ Choir accompanying this artwork. Kruger says this is a time to be dangerous. The only way forward is to take a deep breath and step willingly into the future. Eric Kruger is an author, a podcast host, an executive coach, and a thinking partner to executives. He has a way with words and oozes charm. Deep breath, everyone.
I'd like to share with you one of the many retellings of one of my favorite stories. It goes something like this. A man in Baghdad once sent one of his servants to the market to buy food and drink for guests that would be arriving later in the day. Whilst in the market, the servant decided to have a quick drink at the bar. So he sat down, ordered something to drink, and in a moment of shock, he noticed a stranger sitting across the room from him, staring at him. The stranger was death herself. So he rushed out of the bar, back to the house. He recounted the story to his boss and asked if he could use one of the many horses to go to Samara. a place far enough away so that death wouldn't find him there. His boss agreed, and he jumped on the nearest horse he could find. He rode and finally arrived in Samara. He checked into an inn, entered his room, closed the door, turned around, and there in the corner, waiting for him, was death. So death, obviously seeing the surprise and the horror on this man's face, said to him, "Well, you think you are surprised? Just imagine my confusion this morning when I saw you in the bar in Baghdad, knowing that I had an appointment with you tonight here in Samara." So this is a short tale about inevitability, specifically the inevitability of death. But I wanted to use it to talk to you about the inevitability of the future. Because no matter what you do, you cannot escape the future. You cannot escape the change that is coming. And so, knowing that the future is inevitable, the question becomes, how will you shape it? Whether you like it or not, artificial intelligence, AI, will keep rising. Whether you like it or not, remote work will become more and more mainstream. And this is a big one. Whether you like it or not, the skills that you need for the future might not match the current skill set that you have. And truth be told, all of this talk about the future at conferences, online, is both exhilarating and scary at the same time. We love speaking about the possibilities of the future because what was once science fiction becomes reality. What seemed impossible becomes possible. When we speak about a technologically advanced future, it paints a picture that tomorrow is going to be better, that we'll have more abundance, more ease, less suffering and frustration. But of course, there's also the fear that you might become irrelevant, that your business might not be future ready, that change is happening so fast that you'll be left behind. But there's something else I also want to bring your attention to. There's a danger in speaking about the future as something that seems like it's far off in the distance. The danger is that we buy into the idea of a future that seems to never arrive, that's always pushed down the road. And this leads us to procrastinating on the adoption of certain behaviors and mindsets today because we think they'll only become relevant at some mythical point in the future, when everything has changed, when the future has arrived. And that's simply not the case. It's the equivalent of the age-old proverb of procrastination that says, "I'll start my diet on Monday. Let me do every single other thing before getting to the things that are actually meaningful to me." All of this future stuff can wait while I figure out my life today. This belief creates a mode of operating that makes you very reactive to what's happening around you. You go about your day just putting out fires, just trying to get through the day, and you believe that the future can wait. Well, here's the reality. You are living the future. Right now, you are living in the world created by all of your yesterdays. Mark Strand said that the future is always beginning now. The future isn't building up to some big event. There won't be some great announcement that says the future has arrived. Instead, it creeps in every single day, inevitably, into your personal and professional life, inevitably, with or without you noticing it, inevitably. When we speak about the future, it usually lacks something that's quite pertinent to the motivation we need to get things done. It lacks a deadline. Even with deadlines, most people still procrastinate. Deadlines are great because they tell us that we need to have achieved something by a certain time. In the build-up to this talk, I knew that there was a certain date when I had to have the talk ready, and a certain date when it would be delivered by. And because of that, I could create a plan of action that would allow me to bring my best to the table at the right time. But the future has no deadline, or at least so we seem to think. And so it's easy to do nothing, to talk about future-proofing yourself, to talk about the skills needed to thrive and to be successful in the future. And in fact, that's what people do all the time, is they talk and they talk and they talk about it. But when they get a moment to reflect, they realize that actually they are doing nothing today that prepares them for the inevitable tomorrow. And so I want to tell you that the future does have a deadline. It's the end of each and every day, when you have to account for what you have done today that's going to shape tomorrow. And that really brings us to the crux of what I wanted to tell you today. It's simply this. The future is not about what you are going to do tomorrow, that fictitious moment when the future arrives, but instead about what you are doing now. It means that if we say a mindset of agility, flexibility, and resilience is important for the future, what we are really saying is that it's important today. It means if we say prepare for the future, future-proof yourself, we mean do that today. Because the skills and the mindset that you need to be successful in the future are available to you today. For years, organizations spoke about this idea of being more digital. Yet they've been slow to drag digital into existence. Then COVID-19 came along, and within weeks we saw a major shift in how companies reorganize themselves in this digital world. The opportunity to accelerate, to innovate was always available to them. And similar chances are available to you today, but unfortunately, most often, we wait for things to fall apart. We let a catastrophic event initiate the change that we need to make in our lives. It doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to wake up one morning to realize that you are now a part of what Yuval Noah Harari calls the useless class. People who didn't reskill quickly enough to fill the new jobs created by technology. Change is available to you right now. But it requires you to go beyond thinking in glances about the future. When we think in glances, we simply glimpse at an idea, think that learning has happened, think that we've applied this to our lives, and then we simply move on. When we do this, we don't extract the essence of the idea. And what's even more, no real learning happens. We don't see that idea manifest in how we think and behave. It's the difference between thinking deeply and thinking in glances, the same as looking at pictures of the Colosseum versus going to experience it in person, or reading reviews about food at a restaurant versus sitting down to eat the meal and to savor the smells and the tastes. If you think about it, the world is really set up in a way that promotes this kind of thinking. That's why we love 10-point and 20-point lists, because they feed our need for consumption, but they don't allow us enough time to reflect. And really, the reflection that is needed right now is whether you are doing things today that will shape your future in the best way possible. Are you undergoing an instant evolution? So many years ago, I worked as a physical therapist in intensive care units. And we often saw patients who suffered a myocardial infarction, a heart attack. And I'm going to simplify this a bit to make a point, but we usually saw two different types of patients. The first would have the heart attack, get into ICU, and while still in ICU, they'd ask us to unhook them from everything and take them outside for a smoke. And I found it really interesting that even though they just suffered this massive trauma, they were unwilling to part with lifestyle habits that probably contributed to where they found themselves in the moment. The second type of patient would overnight overhaul their entire life. They would start deepening relationships with friends and family. They would start and commit to a cleaner and healthier lifestyle. And they underwent what I would call an instant evolution. Evolution is typically something that's slow, but in this case, it was accelerated. It was very intentional. And these patients showed me that change is possible immediately and in the moment. You could undergo an instant evolution immediately. You can finish this TEDx talk and immediately change your mindset. You can leave this conference and immediately change your behavior. In fact, you need to. If you are going to keep up with all the changes that are happening in the world, you need to change. The question is, will you? And then, will you do it again and again and again? To sustain change, it's tempting to look at ways to hack, tweak, or optimize performance or behavior. But really, the success of how we change today to be ready tomorrow comes down to a quote that I heard from Sherman Alexie that really changed my life. The quote said, "He loved her, of course, but more than that, he chose her every single day." Choice was what made all the difference. The future never arrives, and it's always arriving. You are living the future today. You can choose a new way of thinking today. You can choose a new way of acting today. You can choose a new way of being today. And then my challenge to you is to choose it again, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, into perpetuity.
Khomotso Mokoena. She is a lecturer at the University of Johannesburg in the Faculty of Law, and she is also the CEO of Spread Love, an NGO that focuses on giving career guidance to students at under-resourced schools. She is amazing. She's won lots of awards. Look her up. She's all about the common good and innovating towards a positive, dynamic future for one and for all. Khomotso Mokoena.
Over the last 2 decades or so, we've seen a meteoric rise of technological development globally. Whether we're talking about automation, the gig economy, robotics, or an all-encompassing digital revolution, people all over the world are experiencing rapid changes in the way we live, work, worship, and play. The way we experience one another, the way we receive, store, sell, and disseminate information have all changed dramatically and continues to do so at an exponential rate. The World Economic Forum notes that the fourth industrial revolution represents a fundamental change in the way we live, work, and relate to one another. It is a new chapter in human development enabled by extraordinary technology advances commensurate with those of the first, second, and third industrial revolutions. But perhaps, for me anyway, most significantly, the World Economic Forum emphasizes that the fourth industrial revolution is about more than just technology-driven change. It's an opportunity to help everyone, including leaders, policymakers, and people from all income groups and nations, to harness converging technologies in order to create an inclusive, human-centered future. The real opportunity is to look beyond technology and find ways to give the greatest number of people the ability to positively impact their families, organizations, and communities. To my mind, for this to work, we need to spend some time considering community, inclusion, and equality. Or perhaps the lack of these is the more fundamental conversation. We already know that South Africa is one of the most unequal societies in the world, and this inequality is very acutely experienced when one considers the differences in accessibility to technology and more broadly the internet. This can also be considered from a global perspective when we consider the differences between the West and the rest, affecting the way nations in the global South are able to interact with the rest of the world from a trade, economic, and socio-political perspective. This gap is not only a technological one, but touches on almost every area of human development and agency. Efedo notes, for example, that in the West, genetic sequencing is now unbelievably cheap, and humans and machines are augmenting and assisting each other with knowledge and skills. Meanwhile, there are 4 billion people in the global South who lack reliable internet access. For Africa, the second industrial revolution is yet to be fully experienced, as nearly 1.3 billion people lack access to electricity. The problem rests not with the failure of the third world to catch up to the fourth industrial revolution, but it is how the fourth industrial revolution raises concerns around issues of power asymmetry and the resulting threats of significantly increased inequality, disempowerment, and exploitation. Instead of the internet then bringing communities closer together, there's an inherent risk because of the inequality of access, of widening the gaps between people. And so, how does one ensure that we move into a just and equitable fourth and fifth industrial revolution, which improves the lives of people and places emphasis on community, equality, and human-centered sustainable development? South Africa has attempted to make very useful strides towards improving universal access to the internet. Last year, the Competition Commission, an independent statutory body regulating competition between firms in the market, reached landmark deals with major data providers in the country that dramatically reduced the cost of data. But without adequate infrastructure in many parts of the country and the high cost of smartphones, this has been of little use to many South Africans. And now, with the onset of COVID-19, the class gap in this country and globally is more acute than ever. The wealthier an individual is, the more inherently safer they are from the virus, able to opt out of potentially unsafe daily activities like grocery shopping, whilst millions of people, many of whom are elderly, stand in long, snaking queues to collect social security payments. This has, in different quarters of society, reignited the call for access to the internet to be considered a human right. And this is my call today. Let us begin again to ask the central questions that will reaffirm the need for internet access to be declared a right in terms of our Constitution, so that citizens are able to take the necessary legal steps to enforce and progressively realize this right. Since the internet became more widely accessible in the 1990s, it's enabled new products and services, improved economic efficiency, transformed access to information, and facilitated better collaboration between governments, business, and citizens. In order for us to begin to leverage the internet in this way, certain things are critical. The main being connectivity and access for all. Recent estimates suggest that less than 10% of people in the least developed countries have access to the internet, compared to more than 80% in developed countries. Of course, like in South Africa, access is particularly poor in rural areas. Second is the question of affordability, with the internet being generally more expensive in relation to the average income in the least developed countries. Of course, this makes it extremely difficult for poorer communities to access internet-enabled services. Lastly, reliability and resilience are critical if governments wish to grow their economies and increase economic opportunities of their citizens. Full participation in the digital economy requires uninterrupted access to the internet. Where this is unavailable, developing and underdeveloped countries will miss out on economic opportunities. Another question that seriously confronts developing countries is a reliable power supply, an issue that has plagued African countries for many years. As a start, it's also important to consider this possibility from a legal lens, from the perspective of South African law, but also international law. The United Nations, as early as 2011, recognized that the internet is a catalyst for a number of human rights, most notably the right to freedom of expression. And in 2016, a report from the Human Rights Council of the United Nations General Assembly declared access to the internet to be a basic human right. And the substance of this really involves two central components. First, access to online content with as few restrictions as possible. And second, and important in the context of emerging nations, availability of the necessary infrastructure and ICTs to enable access to the internet. And for the many who will correctly note that there are other significant rights that we have yet to realize, let us begin to see the right to internet access as an enabler to achieve several other rights. Freedom of expression, also outlined in Section 16 of the South African Constitution, is an enabler of other rights, including the right to education and rights to freedom of association. Notably, the right to freedom of expression and the internet as an enabler of same have a fundamental impact on the ability of citizens to enforce their social, political, and economic rights. This plays a critical role in creating a more equal society where citizens enjoy more equal access to resources and amenities. In addition to this, Section 32 of the South African Constitution provides for a right to access to information despite not currently providing for an explicit right to internet access. What is significant for me about these rights is that Section 9 of the Constitution, the right to equality, must surely underpin them. If that is the case, are we really on a level playing field in terms of accessing these critical rights? Very recently, we know there has been a significant debate as to whether or not learners should be able to go back to face-to-face learning amidst the COVID-19 pandemic and the significant risk to public health that would go with the opening of schools. Parents of learners attending public schools debated back and forth as to whether or not they believe their children would be safe versus the risk associated with leaving their children out of school. As many parents who were not able to work from home online began to return to work, gruesome stories of child abuse of children left alone at home began to emerge, shifting the issue to one of public safety. Whilst this very public debate waged on, private schools provided their learners with online material which allowed them continuous and uninterrupted access to education. Even today, whilst many schools have adopted a phased approach to learning, many lessons continue online, allowing private schools to significantly minimize risk of mass infections amongst learners. Whilst learners in public schools either take the risk or spend the foreseeable future at home, further widening the gap between rich and poor. And so from this example, it's clear that access to the internet has also begun to intertwine with issues of public health. Another right affected in this time is equal access to justice. One of the key principles in law is that justice must not only be done, but it must be seen to be done. This is why open access to courts is so significant, so that citizens are able to view and learn from various court proceedings happening in our myriad of legal fora. With the onset of COVID-19, many courts have been forced to close their doors, understandably to limit the number of people in a particular space. But where are a number of hearings still happening? Online. As members of the legal profession robe and jump online from the comfort of their studies, ordinary citizens are denied the opportunity to learn from and engage the legal process, a process which must belong to all citizens if it is to be effective in shaping the law to the will of the people. Equal access to affordable or free and reliable internet access could significantly narrow the gap in relation to all of the examples provided. Even before COVID-19, we've seen different and interesting ways in which the internet has been used to hold the state accountable. Notable examples of this were the Arab Spring, which demonstrated new ways of mobilization and news reporting, similarly to the Black Lives Matter and Zimbabwean Lives Matter movements, which demonstrated recently citizens being increasingly vocal about police brutality in the US and in Zimbabwe and South Africa. The hashtag #MeToo campaign saw the emergence or resurgence of feminist discourse amongst people all over the world and enabled women globally to begin speaking openly about the atrocities of sexual violence that they have experienced. And these were notoriously secret crimes. The internet has begun to provide victims with a global voice. In 2008, the government of Rwanda embarked on a nationwide rollout of fiber optic as a backbone infrastructure for broadband. This optic fiber connected different parts of the country and provided high-capacity cross-border links with onward connectivity to submarine cables. To help facilitate this initiative to improve the provision of internet access to Rwandan citizens, the International Telecommunication Union and the Rwanda Utilities Regulatory Authority undertook a project to deploy wireless broadband connectivity across the country, with a focus on rural areas specifically. The project is helping to provide free or low-cost digital access for schools, hospitals, and for underserved populations to access online services and information. The network now covers 90% of Rwanda's population. Political will is critically important to achieve these goals. Government should continue to focus its efforts on partnerships with the private sector to achieve similar goals. Google's Project Loon was launched in 2017 to enable the use of giant balloons to bring broader internet access to rural communities. One balloon is the size of a tennis court and are self-sustaining and can provide coverage for over 5,000 square kilometers. These partnerships are useful, but in developing these alliances, government should see them as a temporary solution and use them as a learning opportunity for us to develop our own sustainable solutions. The Competition Commission, in its report relating to the costs of data in South Africa, makes useful recommendations to the state. The main recommendation it makes is that local and national government, under the lead of the Department of Telecommunications, spearheads the development of free public Wi-Fi in low-income areas, including commuter points like train stations and taxi ranks. In my view, this must be more than a recommendation. The Commission has broad powers to make rulings which affect the economic inclusion of South Africans. Although we've not seen significant litigation to this effect, it would be useful to see civil society organizations beginning to make demands on the state through the courts for meaningful realization of a right to internet access as a way of creating a more equal society and a more just fourth industrial revolution. And nothing stops the legislature from legislating to this effect to give citizens an opportunity to begin enforcing progressive realization to a possible right to access to the internet. I would argue, in fact, that the rights to access to information must be developed through case law to include a right to internet access. In fact, should the state not take this seriously, we risk continuing to relegate our population to the corners of economic activity, rendering them post-colonial orphans who cannot effectively compete globally and are perpetually reliant on big international players and lenders. One of my personal mantras by Ralph Waldo Emerson is, "Don't be pushed by your problems, be led by your dreams." In closing, I'm taken back to a memory from earlier this year. One of my first-year law students telling the class and a senior member of the legal profession who had come to give them a talk that in high school he had spent hours online watching court hearings and that this is what had inspired him to become a lawyer. The internet gave him access and room to dream, to imagine. South Africa, like many emerging countries, has significant challenges moving side by side with untapped potential. The internet is not only a rights enabler, but used properly, it is a dream enabler. If we are to begin to solve our problems, we must surely grow and enable problem solvers, dreamers. So I want to propose to insist that the state begins to put our dreamers first, our young people, our foot soldiers of change. Ensure that they all equally have space to read, to learn, to think, to grow, to discard old ideas and stereotypes, to complain and rant, to be, to imagine, to dream, so that they can begin the work of changing their own circumstances, the lives of their family, and the destinies of their people.
TEDx University of Johannesburg is all about bringing together thought leaders and brilliant local artists. So our next clip is by artist Leklogonolo Mashaba. He is a visual artist and a printmaker, and this piece is called Reform 11, where you see this lone figure fading until it becomes translucent. His work is all about how body, spirit, technology come together. So this piece, Reform 11, attempts to establish this dialogue. Goodbye and good night. We hope there was plenty for you here to hold and remember. So take a deep breath in and out without collapse, and ride that wave into the future. The future is here, so here we go.